you're all right, given what you're doing, so let's look at all of you together. And that's what this plot is. And the way we do it's called a Rayleigh distribution with the Monte Carlo simulation of taking all that information and turning it into a probability space, right? So this red line at the bottom is the future oil supply that 97% of all the experts agree we will probably have. So that's your low risk tolerance position. If you want to plan for a future where you are using an amount of oil which will probably be available, you look at this end. And if you want to say, well, I'm willing to take a huge risk that none, not even the US Geological Survey, none of the experts really think we're going to have more than that amount of oil up here in this time frame, 2030, 2040, 2050, then you'd be crazy to be looking up here. And what you see then is if you're willing to accept that argument, that probably if we listen to all the experts out there, that that's the way to manage our risk position, then you can see for yourself what that means. This we actually did in 2005, and we've been right so far. That's the area that oil supply has been in, that green area, the high percentage area. And if you want to do long-term planning, even at a 50-50 probability, which isn't all that good, half of the experts think there will be a bit more oil, half of them think there will be less, then this is what we're looking at. By the year 2050, so 40 years in the future, a 50% reduction in the amount of fuel you use. All right, in 2010, talking to the city of Dundedin, this is really hard to get your head around. Using less oil at all is nearly impossible to think about. I mean, for you guys, I know it isn't. But you know that 90% of the people out there, they would just not be able to get their heads around that. How would we use less oil? We were planning on using more. Right? In 2008, the IEA said we were going to have 250% more, by this time. What the heck? So the very idea of using less, the trick here, how did I get the City Council of Dundedin and the businesses of Dundedin to accept this premise that we are going to now embark on a planning and modeling and analysis exercise by which we are going to look at what steps to take to reduce our oil demand by 50% by 2050. How did I get them to do that? Because I let them choose their risk position. You tell me, what risk position do you want to take? The one I'm doing for Palmerston North right now, they chose 85%. Dundedin, well, we don't know. So we'll go with 50-50. If you let someone else take control in any way, don't just be bombarding them with stuff. Let them take some control. They get some choice. You tell me what's your risk position. Okay then, this is that's what we plan for then. That's a huge turnaround. If you want to use this, it's a published journal paper. It's a published New Zealand Transport Authority research paper, or research, it's not a paper, it's real thick. There's a lot of other journal papers based on this. It's pretty useful. Do you understand that difference between you just telling somebody, there's a problem with peak oil, there's a problem with peak oil? Well, you tell me, what risk are you willing to take? And let's see what all of the experts in petroleum geology have to say about that. And let's, if you want to agree with all of them, then let's go. So that was the very first big trick. So now that we're ready to talk about planning, 10, 20, 30, 40 years in the future, what are we going to work on? This is New Zealand fuel use, transport energy use, in 2009. And aviation's pretty big, actually. It is pretty big in this country. Here's all of our production. Mining, recreation, forestry, agriculture, that's our tourists. Behind the gate, on road. Where's our fishing? It's too small to see, really. So the things that we do that actually, that's how we make a living, is the purple one. And then rail, you can see is a pretty small slice, so I'm sure National is justified in getting rid of it. That's the rationale, right? Okay. and this one. This is what we're going to work on. What I'm thinking is that, here's the position, that if there's going to be a 50% reduction in the amount of fuel in the system, that there will be an allocation. That we will not have a 50% reduction over all sectors. That the sectors that actually produce what we need will use oil. And us driving down to the video store, maybe not. Right? This is very elective, or we don't actually know what it is actually, because nobody's studied it too much. So this is where we're going to go now. We're going to go to what's called personal transport. You and me moving ourselves around in cars. And we're going to have to think about that changing over time. This little cartoon I made, say, look, change happens. We are beings of change. It isn't the change that we're afraid of, it's a change we don't understand that we're afraid of. All we have ever done is change. When we didn't change, we were called Neanderthals, and look what happened to them. So, change is us, we're okay with that. But what we have to do is have some way to understand what is a good investment right now and what's a dud. Because if I invest in something that's fruitful throughout that change, that's a good idea. That was a good use of our remaining assets. And what I do know is that all of that involves less energy. So anything that gets me growth, that's true, growth. Everything has growth, even a poor spindly little tree up in a really windy place that's pretty hard to live in. There's growth and there's decay. And it's knowing which leaves to put out that will actually get us a little bit of food, right? Why do you think they always just sort of grow into the sun, right? So even though there will always be less of this good thing that we like so much, oil, the key to flourishing when there's less is to not need so much, right? If there isn't much to work with, then the key is to work fine without needing much, right? That's one of your principles, isn't it? Is it? Something like that. A rewriting of a principle. Now here's the trick with it though. It means adaptation. And again, in a way that we don't understand all that well. So what we have to understand, well, the engineering work I have to do, is to find out how we depend on fuel and how that change can occur. And we call that adaptive capacity. What is the ability to change? What does it cost? Do we actually save money? Is there something else good that would happen if we changed in that way anyway? So, looking at our current energy use, how it changes, at least as fast as the oil supply changes, to a future travel demand, and understanding this little problem. Can y'all see that picture? It's the famous monkey trap. All right. Understanding that we're all in a monkey trap. That there's something that we know is our favorite thing. We know it works really well, and yet there's a danger coming if we don't let go of it. So I got to figure out two things. I got to figure out how to get you to let go of the thing that you do understand, that you do really like, and then how to figure out that that you need to do that, and that it would be better if you did. So it's a little bit of a trick of an engineering problem, but that's all right. And this is just a bit of understanding that the way we use energy is not just because we're bad people. Right? You've heard that, right? Well, if people would just not, right? Bad behavior, all of you. You drove a car. Bad. Oh, well, somebody made a very nice road, a very easy to drive vehicle, plenty of fuel to put in it, at a price I can afford. I would actually be irrational. Where are those bike riders? That's bloody irrational to ride your bike here. They're the nuts. The rest of us are doing the obvious thing, right? So that all comes about understanding the spatial relationships between things. Where are things? The distances between things is really where it's at. Once that's set, then on top of that you can put, well, okay, what networks do people have to actually move between those things? Where are they? Where are the things they need to get to? And how are those connected? If they're only connected by freeway, don't get on your bike and ride on the freeway. That's not a good idea, right? And then the urban form that goes around those things. Or sometimes it's backwards. There actually was an urban form and then somebody plowed a freeway through it. So these two things go together. And then by the time you're in that setting, you can make behavior choices. So don't put it all on people's behavior. You have to go all the way down and look at your land use planning, your transportation networks, the way your urban form is laid out, how walkable it is, how accessible it is, how polluted it is, how dangerous it is, how pleasant it is, how treated it is, right? There's an awful lot of stuff you have to look at before you can say people should change their behavior. Right? And that's all the engineering stuff. So that's the stuff we're going to look at. And then once you have that behavior component, that then determines how much energy is used. So here's what we did for Dundedin. First thing is those destinations. What's the land use pattern? This is where the people live in Dundedin. Dundedin City Council actually, okay, everybody knows Dunedin's a city in the South Island, right? 160,000 people, more or less. And Dundedin City Council actually is this huge land area. There's a little city that's pretty compact right here. University, medical center, regional medical center. There's industrial stuff. There's a port. There's a rail station, CBD. So it's a nice little city, but it actually includes a lot of people spread out all around. And that's GIS data, it's called. Now, with that data, we mine through Ministry of Transport Board of Fitness data. And why nobody's ever thought to do this before, I don't know. But it was a pretty good idea. Got a student to spend a lot of time in front of a computer. And we can now mine that database to find out how much you drive. And connect it to your household. And so these are the people, these are the burbs of Dundedin. And here's how much they drive. So it's a huge sample. This database has 40 million data points in it. So it's a pretty good sample. The people right in the middle of town, central Dundedin, they drive in the 10,000 K a year range. And the people in the lifestyle areas, out on the beach, the people who like to, mostly what, the people from the UK? That's what we found anyway. I mean, you know, you come from a place where living by the ocean is like the thing you could never do, right? You would aspire to that. And then you come to Dundedin, geez, you can go get a house out on the beach, you're there. And then the rural people, it comes back down again. So just kind of interesting. But what this gives us is the travel demand pattern as a function of where people are living in this city. And the next thing that's really important is your income segregation. All right, if we were looking at a map of Phoenix in the United States, or Detroit, we would see that the people of low means, the people without a lot of money, are segregated in certain places. And the very affluent people, or we'd even see this in Sydney, the affluent people are segregated into other places. And transportation-wise, this is a huge energy footprint. Because, I'm guessing, not all of the jobs for low-income people are in the low-income area. They're having to try to move out of that area into the rest of the city. And in general, if they don't have public transport to do that, they're having what's called transport poverty, that they're actually poor because of transport, because they can't get to jobs. And that's a very big problem in a lot of the world. And what we see for Dundedin, what this is, high vulnerability means you have a low household income. You have, in the New Zealand's household survey, you said you had to drive to work. You drove your car to work, and you have a mortgage. So your ability to pay more for fuel isn't that great, and yet you have to drive to work. So that puts you in the high vulnerability. If you have plenty of money, or if you don't have a lot of money and you said, no, I don't have to drive to work, I rode my bike to work yesterday, then you would have probably a low vulnerability because you're not exposed to the risk of high fuel price. So if we look at Dundedin, what we see is that we don't have a lot of segregation. These are as small units as you can get. They're the household census units. And that mixture, the fact that people of different incomes can live anywhere in the city, they can choose what their distance that they travel is, because they have the ability to choose where in that city they're going to live. That's huge. City of Dundedin, don't lose this. This is like getting a test because you thought maybe you had cancer and you find out you don't. Okay, this is really good news. That the city of Dundedin does not have income segregation. It has the ability for people to live anywhere in the city. So that's a good tool, a good diagnostic tool. The next one that we came up with was the PhD work of Monteiro Wachara, and it's a type of self-energy audit of your transportation travel demand. And you can go online and do this program if you want, and it will calculate your risk exposure to high fuel price, and it will calculate how far you go. And if you can use Google Map, you can do it. It's hooked into Google Maps, so you put, there's my house, and there's where I went, and I went on Monday, so you fill it out like a diary. So we did this survey for Dundedin, and here's some people doing the survey. And what the idea here is that the way it works is you put in your normal week. Okay, on Monday I go from home to work at 9, and then I come home at 5 and I pick up the kids on the way. So you just put in your life. And then for each one of those trips, if it was a car trip, we ask you, do you have another way? If you couldn't use your car, do you have another way to make that trip? And your options are no, I don't. Or yeah, I could bike. Yeah, I could get a ride with somebody. Yeah, I could ride the bus. Yeah, I could walk. Yeah, I could just do it without traveling. If you tell us you could do those other things, and you got up to 3 choices, then what we think is that you have adaptive capacity. If you say no, then something bad would happen if you couldn't use your car. And what we found was that people substituted in that their own idea of why they might not have a car, and it didn't have anything to do with peak oil. We actually tried this survey a couple of years before that, which is why we had to invent this survey. And we asked people, what would you do if the price of fuel went up? This was in 2005. They said, well, that's so far away. I mean, what? That wouldn't happen. Nobody answered the question. I mean, it's terrible to have a student who's, this is their project, and they get, they go to all this work, write up the survey, ask 60 people, what would you do if the price of fuel doubled? Well, that can't happen. Well, by then my income would be doubled, so it wouldn't matter. Well, that couldn't happen. It did! 3 years later. It was a good question. So I had to find a different way to find out your adaptive capacity. And we don't know exactly what pressure it is that pushes you, but what we think we know is that whatever you tell us, yeah, I have another way, that's true, and it is the maximum adaptive capacity. So for, you've got price elasticity, which we're not all that elastic with price, but what people were substituting was, oh, like when the battery went flat, right? When I couldn't use my car. Do I have another way to do that? And we didn't have anyone panic and fall out of their chair. 580 participants, so that was good. So here's Dundedin's results. The number of trips in a week that people who normally drive a car, this is 100% of the car trips in our survey, the number of trips per week that people could have another way was 60%. Would you have guessed it's that high? Right, because people won't get out of their car, will they? No. People don't want to get out of their car. Behavior, behavior, behavior. Truth is, in Dundedin, they can. This is funny though. They have a bus service, but it wasn't a real popular thing. And we did have one guy told us, "No, I'd rather walk an hour than ride the bus." Not quite sure what's going on in Dundedin, but that it could improve their bus service apparently. If we add up the kilometers, it's not quite as much as 50% of the kilometers traveled in Dundedin right now in a week could be done in a way that doesn't use fuel, and the number of liters per week, about 40%. Could be done another way. Now you see on that one, the other way is bus. So buses are also subject to peak oil, so we're going to have to talk about that in a minute. This is an analysis which is now being used for other cities, and it's been published in a very prestigious journal. What we're doing here is every green dot is a house. So again, we use that data about where people live. So every green dot is a house. Every blue dot is a destination, and in this case, a primary school. And if, the computer program goes along the transport network, so paths, roads, whatever, goes along the transport network between origins and destinations. And if that distance, in this case, is walkable by a primary school child, then the house gets a green dot. If it is only accessible cycling by a primary school child, so that's like 1.5 kilometers, and this one's about 700 meters, then it gets that. And if it's outside that range, it gets a red dot. So looking at the city of Dundedin, the children in that town can get to their schools by walking. I wouldn't close any of those schools, actually. So there's a decision about assets that in the light of the future of needing to use less fuel, you get an answer that it makes sense to actually have all these schools there, which is probably why they were there in the first place, because people did walk to school, right? It makes some kind of sense. So there, first asset decision, don't shut down any more of the primary schools. How about food, supermarket access? Right now the supermarkets are where other kind of markets used to be, but here they are in Dundedin. These blue dots are places you can get food, and this is grown-ups in Dundedin. Most of them can access a supermarket without a car. That's interesting information.
How do they carry this stuff home? Like trailers.
I think that mechanical engineers could contribute to how people move loads around by foot. There's a lot of very clever engineering that could be done, right? Hand trucks, hand trolleys, wheelbarrow, that would hurt your shoulders. We can do better than that. Better, come on.
Bike trailer.
Yeah, bike trailers, that's pretty handy. Servant, I like that one. Oh, what's happening? Deny. Whoops, okay, there we go. Allow is better? Okay. We'll be inclusive of whatever that was. Okay.
Always allow.
Always allow. All right, thank you. All right, so here's those are all the tests we did on Dundedin to see what their position is. You know, what is the size of the issue for you with peak oil, Dundedin? And so think of it as a health test, right? So you do all these tests, and Dundedin is not all bad news, but fruitful adaptation will require transition engineering. So we are going to look at what we could do with the urban form, with technology, and with behavior. The current urban form, people drive 95% of the time. 95% of all trips are by car. Okay, that's sounding a bit like behavior, since we said they could take another way. But what if there were more housing in the urban center? Where people said they were going, the biggest number of trips is shopping. That's the biggest percentage. When people get in the car to go, is shopping. So what if there were, say, 20% more people lived right in the central city where our least traveling people were, then what would happen? And that would save, we can actually calculate how much fuel that would save. What would it be like to have more people living in the center of Dundedin? Would it be a horrible thing? We know Kiwis don't like density, right? We don't like to live on top of each other. But we're not talking about everybody. Could we find 20% of the people who now live, out somewhere else where they're having to travel a lot? If we gave them a nice place to live in an urban area where they had all the amenities and they could walk out their door and get everything they need, that actually is an appealing lifestyle to a lot of people. So it might not be the worst thing ever. And it would be real estate development, and it would be recovery of a lot of old historic buildings which are now decrepit and empty in that city. So redevelopment of your downtown, it is a type of growth. It's a kind of economic growth. It's a kind of giving people a job, giving people a nice place to work. It spurs economic growth around it. We also said you have to close down some of those horrible streets with all the traffic on them. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worth going there. All right, integrated urban villages. Now this is one that when we looked back in the history of Dundedin, we actually found them there in the first place. Okay, well, the always allow wasn't the ultimate solution. All right, so we looked at those where there's now sort of these shopping areas and they're getting a bit decrepit, and we said, okay, we calculated that if you revitalize those little things into little villages, that you could reduce the car demand, again, because of shopping. So what would that look like? We'd be talking about some sort of a thing. The experience of it at ground level is a village, a real one, just a strip mall or something. It's because what we want to do is on the weekends we want to have open access markets. We can actually use models of if you give people access to markets, which means a place they can meet the customer at a low cost with the right kind of regulation around it that doesn't try to stifle it, but that lets it flourish, you can grow local businesses. And the local business in Dundedin is pretty gone. It used to be there pretty flourishing, and now it's pretty much gone. So we grow local businesses. The next one was 100 kilometers of bikeways. So safe bikeways. All those kids who could get to their schools, they are going to be able to get to their schools without ever having to fight with a car. All right, my alternative to this won't even be an alternative, but the other thing, if anybody wants to champion a policy, a Krumdieck policy, $10,000 fine, you touch a human with your car. Automatic fine. The problem is not bikers hitting cars, I'm pretty sure. The problem is not pedestrian damage to vehicles. The problem is vehicles not seeing. I didn't even see them. Well, look! If you had an automatic $10,000 fine if your car touched a human being, you'd start looking for them, wouldn't you? Oh, but people will throw themselves in front of cars then to get $10,000. Right. Somehow, I think not. All right, and by the way, that wasn't original from me. They do that in Taiwan. If you hit one of those scooters, if you hit a pedestrian, a scooter, or a biker with a car, it's much bigger than $10,000. And they have very, very few accidents. It's amazing what looking for people will do. All right, the other one is this one, electric trolley buses. Not necessarily the rail ones, but an electric overhead bus is immune to peak oil. And if you look at where you could lay those out, if I go, if I want a development, like a retail development, a cafe, I need 3 reasons why people come past my door to have a flourishing business. 3 reasons. One might be that they came to my shop, but that wouldn't be the best one. The best one would be they came to my shop for some reason. All right, any of you have a small business where you rely on foot traffic? It's like that. That if people are moving past your shop, you'll survive. If you are relying on them coming to your shop to get your thing, forget it. It's just not going to happen. So you need destinations is what they're called. It's a connectivity thing. It's a reason to go to a place. So our places, remember we were talking about those integrated urban villages? Those are also in proximity of schools. They are at the terminuses for these trolleys, which get you to the other ones, and they are those shopping districts, those town centers, and the weekend markets. So this is how we connected up Dundedin. And we also want to look at technology changes. Over the next 40 years, will we have a substitution of vehicles with a high enough efficiency that 50% can happen? There could be a big change to where people are using scooters instead of cars. It won't get us there though. We can't really get a 50% change. How about behavior change? If people adopted all those changes they told us, we saw it would be quite a bit of the fuel use would be reduced. So possible, we'll call it a low carbon lifestyle. And what about alternatives? What if we just have biofuels and electric cars? Could we then just carry on with things? So we did calculations and a lot of research into the availability of biofuels. And again, we're talking 40 years. So over the next 40 years, are you going to have cars that can run on electricity that you can substitute in? And what we do then is a calculation thingy where we take the adaptive potentials at each given time, roll them forward, do an iterative yada yada, never mind. And we give you an output that has the cost factor in it, it has the probability that that will happen in it, it has how much of that 50% target do we meet, and it has whether, you take all those things together and you get the answer you were looking for. Now, there is, I will say, and I'm just going to say this over and over, there is no answer, there is no solution. There's only a lot of difficult choices, okay? So what we've done is to not tell you this is your answer. Build those villages. No, it's more like, okay, let's see. If we don't do anything, if we have the current urban form that we're used to, what are the chances that we can get to that 50% reduction fruitfully? Well, if you rely on biofuels and electric vehicles, the chances are nil. It will not happen. You will have to lose activities. Something won't be working anymore. That's what red means and what no means. Do you know what no means? It means no. I know you love your electric car idea, okay? But it's just like, no. With the proviso, if what you mean by electric car is a golf cart, and if you build those little urban villages, and if you could bike anyway, then that electric cart would probably be quite useful for people with like a broken hip or bringing a baby home from the hospital. That would be useful. Moving some cargo. If what you mean is electric cars, so what I know now would just continue and it's just okay, technology just substitutes and it's all good. No. Sorry, no. Okay? Just, it's a whole nother talk. All right. Biofuels? No. Sorry. No. It's not there. It's not there in any way that is relevant to this problem. Right? Maybe 4%, but probably mostly diesel. It's just not there. It's something that the mind wants to happen. The mind wants to have substitutions. The mind wants to have answers. I'm sorry, it's not like that. All right, so we knock those ones off. And then we say, okay, what about these combinations of urban form changes and efficiency improvements? And that's not too bad. If we have choices about the vehicles that we use that is much more efficient, and we're talking much more efficient, which means you have a vehicle, but you don't use it very much, and you have a scooter that you use when you're going to use a vehicle. So it's like, you see what I mean? To get 3 liters per 100 kilometers, you have a scooter and you have a vehicle, but you can see the proportion of which you use how much. And that is possible, especially if you adapt your urban form so that your longer trips you can take other ways. The low carbon lifestyle definitely is the key. But remember, we're talking about a city where that choice is possible. If the choice is not possible, forget it. Which, if we look at the current urban form, it's not as easy, it's barely possible, which means the next 50 years after that, you gotta really start doing something else. So these urban changes, the urban form changes, the bikeways, the integrated urban villages, the dense urban city center, if you have other reasons to do those, like that they're good ideas and they improve business, then they are going to increase your adaptive capacity. And they're going to allow people to make changes that they will be able to just adapt to that future that's coming. And that's probably where we want to go. There is a high risk of doing nothing. There's definitely a high risk of doing nothing if what you think you're doing is waiting for technology or alternative fuels to come in and sort you out. Right? Because that simply just doesn't work. All right, so sort of a conclusion is that what's going to happen is going to happen, and our choices are about how it happens. And what I think, they scheduled me for a open space for this afternoon for 4 o'clock. And I think what I'd like to talk about there is this how. And I just popped a couple of slides in because a couple of years ago, my group of students and I, we said, look, there's a lot of intention out there. We've been working with a lot of towns where they wanted to do, peak oil vulnerability. They wanted to work stuff out. They wanted to get better. And it was even before Transition Town started. And we just thought there's a lot of potential out there. There's a lot of energy. And those people with that energy, if we could work with them, if you could actually use that energy, not just burn it out, if you could use it and change things, have it be the spur, then that would be cool. So we sat down, we did a lot of thinking, a lot of brainstorming, a lot of research, international research about how people do development projects, especially when they have like brownfields in Europe, problems like that. And we found and put together, the wisdom from around the world of how you might do that and what it would look like. And that process we called Transitionscape, and we trialed it in Dundedin in 2008, 2007. We had a weekend workshop, and the point there is to actually come out with projects that need doing, positive projects that can be done with the people who can do them, and the processes that they need to get started doing it. And that process looks like, number one, recognition of the situation, so really understanding it, and socialization of the people who want to make a difference about it. Then the awareness of how things are different You know, what the change means. Awareness of that, which you can see we've been moving through with the Dundedin study. Then creativity, facilitation of creativity and of adaptation responses and challenges to the new environment. So facing that change with creativity. I don't know if you've noticed, we haven't developed adaptations in our physical sense. You know, we don't have fangs, we don't have stripes, we don't have claws, we don't have a whole lot of useful things physically that other animals have. Our key to adaptation, our strategy for adaptation is actually our creativity. It's our ability to think about things that aren't yet. And if they don't lock you up for that, then you get called inventive. Right, so that's our key, that's how we adapt. So finding ways to actually unleash that and unlock it, the creativity. Then increase connectivity and organizational structures appropriate to these challenges. So finding the resources you need to do what you have found is probably a good thing to do. And then learning. Everybody has to learn all the time. That's the thing I think is so missing, and that we found in our research was so important, that if everybody's always learning, then it keeps working. If you think you already know the answer, you're done and you're of no use to anybody. But if you are always learning, then the creativity can keep flowing and you can keep moving, you can keep adapting with everything that comes up. And this is just, again, some more of that transition-scape stuff, how you assess the projects and how they're going to work. And that's
Is this stuff available for general use, or?
It's actually published and stuff like that, which I know is like the zero most useful thing ever that people like me do. Publish stuff. But actually, if you go to the University of Canterbury website, and you can find me, there are links to my published papers that you can get. Most published papers, if you know what I mean, like journal papers, the stuff that I'm supposed to produce, you can't get to unless you want to pay for them. But I can put online a version of that paper pre-publication, so a Word document that doesn't have the logo and stuff of the journal. And so those versions are available from the Canterbury University for free, and they're Google Scholar linked. All those things squeak through. So anyway, that's what I had to say today. And I can explain more about that Transition-scape project and how it works. That was, has anybody here ever heard the Transition Declaration of Independence? Yeah, I wrote that for that thing. It was part of that recognition of the problem and socialization, like coming together and understanding what our purpose is, what our core purpose is. And that was just part of a tool for that, even though it's kind of cool. All right, so we had questions. Let's do that.
I looked at your model and I thought, there's a few bits and pieces that are missing. It's the Tesla technology, which is sort of coming to form at the moment throughout various parts of the world, which was at the start of the century, last century, and now they're sort of rediscovering it and sort of introducing the system. So that's one.
Tesla system?
Tesla electricity. Tesla actually started.
I mean DC instead of AC, or?
Yep.
Okay.
That's already, they're refining it in different countries. So that's one. So if that's developed, there's no problems with electricity. So peak oil can go overnight. Two, with vehicles, there's a number of vehicles that are developed at the moment that are ready to go on the market, and that's the hydrogen-based vehicles with lithium batteries. That's an option.
What's your question?
All right. Well, we have some alternative transport question over here, but I don't want to leave people not wondering what's going on.
Also, we've got nuclear fission. You've got nuclear fusion, which is dangerous. Nuclear fission has just come on the market.
All right. All right. Well, the question I'm going to repeat. The gentleman was wondering about Tesla, which I guess is DC grid instead of AC. Hydrogen cars and electric cars. And if it makes you feel better to hope for that, then go ahead and do it. If you want to start a business to make those things, go ahead and do it. if it in any way delays you from working on a real adaptation, don't do it. All right? Just get over it. Question?
Well, for public transport system to be economically viable, you need some kind of population density in the city. But I guess what I'm saying is that once you sort of draw, dense sort of pattern in the city, you require more energy. So that's what sort of relates to the story tonight.
Right.
But yeah, what do you do with that?
All right, the question is about public transport. And in the field of transportation engineering, the issues around how you actually put together your transportation networks, which means all of the ways that people can move, how you look at those origins and destinations, where people want to go, those sort of things, and how public transportation fits into that. There is no question whatsoever that public transportation is not a panacea. And it's definitely true that for given urban forms, it's very difficult for it to be viable. So it actually is a pretty big engineering question. But it's like if you ask me, well, what about suspension as opposed to arches for bridges? It sort of depends on how you do it. And so public transportation, what I will tell you is that network of electric trolleys that we put in for Dundedin is on top of their previous electric trolleys that they took out in the 50s. That was a viable system. It worked for a very long time. And when cars were, the big rage, I think it was those poor things were. Yeah, it was very successful and profitable. And I think it was then seen as old-fashioned when you had your own car. So they had to go. But that system, it left its mark on the city of Dundedin. Dundedin is public transportable. Not with a high-speed elevated train, because that's not appropriate. We're not trying to move 20,000 people an hour. We're trying to move people through destinations where they have 3 things to do. Remember, always 3 things. If you're just talking about commuting, you have to have very special situations where that works, where it's profitable to do that. So very high density populations is one of those, that's for sure. How about clearing the bay? Red cap.
One thing that you didn't say anything about was how much it was going to cost if we decided to any or all of what we're talking about. So my question is, whatever it costs, where's the money coming from?
Right, this is, we did actually working cost into these assessments. And the cost, if you think about the cost of building 100 kilometers of bike pathways, we consulted with their transport engineers, the traffic engineers in Dundedin, and they said we could work that into the budget next year. It's not expensive. The cost of changing your rules to allow weekend markets, of providing the odd tent. These are not expensive things. Transition town members have figured out how to afford weekend markets. The other one is the dense city center. Again, that is more about changing your code, changing your regulation to allow development to happen in a certain way. And you get more rates back from that anyway. And then, what was the other one? The electric trolley buses. The one I'm worried about is people having the money to buy new vehicles. That's what I'm worried about. Then the electric trolley buses, those are actually cheaper to run than their existing bus system. So, let's go to somebody else. The usual place where it would come from in our suggestion is the existing expenditure on parking.
Is there a potential weakness to the study in the assumption that supermarkets and jobs will remain in the same location during a peak oil situation?
All right, the question was about supermarkets. What is the prospect for supermarkets giving peak oil? And that is my PhD student, Janet Asuncion's PhD project. And jobs. Really trying to understand the diesel intensity of the supermarket system and how it compares to any other kind of market system, and what's the adaptive potential of that whole system to using less oil. This is a really big question which has not even been asked in the field. I think that's, in the whole field of logistics and that. She's the first one to actually change the logistics model to put an energy constraint on it. It's we're a bit late here, folks, for what we've been thinking about. But the question about supermarkets is those supermarkets that are there in Dunedin right now are where the village centers used to be. You've got now a supermarket surrounded by pavement and a few decrepit relics of, I mean, no offense to Dunedin, but, it could be better. So there's a reason why that's the marketplace, because it's always made sense for it to be the marketplace, and it definitely used to be the terminuses of these public transport systems, where people would get off the trolley, there's foot traffic. They have a reason to be there because it's the end of the line. They have a reason to be there because you can go shopping there, right? And there's other services there, the doctor's office, etc. So the supermarket can change at any minute. A supermarket, if they decide to build one, they build one. If they decide to fold one up, they fold one up. They're not a permanent fixture. The jobs of producing and delivering the food and the produce and the goods that people need, right now we pay people in Australia mostly to do that, to a certain degree Auckland. If that changes to where we pay more people in our own communities to do it, what I think is that people will fulfill whatever needs there are, right? We've got this creative opportunity bug somewhere in part of the brain. I'll bet that people would, I'll bet I could, right? You've just got that, and it's hard to squanch it. And it just turned out that with the advent of the car, somebody said, I'll bet if we gave everybody all the shopping that they normally have to walk all the way up and down town to do in one place, and a huge parking lot so they could park the car, which now on Main Street they have to drive around looking for a place. I'll bet. Yeah, that would work. And it did. And it does. It'll change. So if I was going to invest, I would invest in more supermarkets. And I would start working with the supermarkets on how they